Angela mentioned the importance of equity and being able to connect our minority-serving institutions to greater resources. We recently held a national convening of minority-serving community colleges and brought about 130 of these institutions to Washington, D.C. They met with 13 federal agencies. Chase Sackett, I see from HUD, is here. He was at the convening. We had also a wide variety of Department of Education folks meeting with the institutions to provide technical assistance on how to access federal resources for their students. We had funders there. So we're going to move forward with that as a launch point by creating communities of practice. These institutions serve a disproportionate share of underrepresented students in higher education, and many are under-resourced. So by being able to help focus resources and attention on these institutions and help create those communities so that they can exchange promising practices, we hope will pay dividends for students. And probably an area of innovation that relates the most to what we're talking about today is the approval in 2014 for what are called performance partnership pilots, P3. Congress authorized 10 pilots in 2015 that would allow the greater flexibility in pooling discretionary funds from among 6 federal agencies: Department of Education, Labor, Health and Human Services, Justice, Corporation for National and Community Service, and Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Ghostbusters, and where they had those streams and you never cross the streams, or, right? The whole universe implodes. That's often what we're told about crossing federal funding streams, right? If you cross the streams, bad things will happen. So these are discretionary funding streams, not mandatory, but still it provides greater flexibility for the pooling and awarding of these funds. And so we just announced the first 9 awardees. For example, Los Angeles, City of Los Angeles, Los Angeles County Community College, and the LA Unified School District will be working together. And these particular pilots will focus on opportunity youth. But we're going to learn a lot from these pilots in terms of how different funding sources can play together, work together, focus on a specific population, and what kinds of outcomes will result from that. And we hope that this, in turn, can inform future policy initiatives and future policy making in terms of how different federal funding sources can be leveraged. So those are, I would say, the highlights. Certainly, WIOA is something to pay attention to, with the common metrics now across all the core programs, all the titles. And it's going to be, I used to measure my kids' developmental stages by WIA reauthorization dates. My first kid was born, and now 17 years later, she's a senior in college. I guess the point is that WIOA is going to be around for a while, so it's going to have a huge impact. So I think it's important for us to continue to pay attention as the regulations become finalized and see what kind of impact they have. But the idea is that there would be greater consistency across the core programs, because they're going to be held to common metrics. And now everybody's got a stake in everybody else's success, and it should set the stage for better and greater integration of funding and support. So I also wanted to say there is more interagency work happening around a variety of different topics that it could lend momentum to what we're talking about today. It started with the job-driven training agenda, the president, prior to WIOA reauthorization, getting all the federal cabinet agencies together and saying, okay, let's get aligned. It never really had happened before, and it did happen around 7 criteria for job-driven training. And we also now have the Financial Literacy Education Commission working on financial literacy, and there's a stream for community college students. Chase, I know, is working on housing and security community college students there with HUD, and so we're in conversation all the time. So I think the timing is really good for this paper, for this concept, and and for this issue to come out.
Well, so a lot of really interesting stuff, and I guess I'm inclined to want to see whether you all have questions for each other. But I guess the thing that jumped out at me in hearing you all talk was the tension, if not outright conflict, between some of the regulations and rules is really sort of stunning. And I guess I'm thinking about, I guess it seems to me there's such tension, and I guess I'd probably want to start with Angela at the campus level, the minimum enrollment requirement to stay eligible for federal funding and the minimum work requirements for some of these other programs seem to be, if not completely at odds, very much in tension, especially when we know. And so it sounds like you're doing some of the creative things about what kind of work students are doing. But so how fundamental is that tension? And maybe I guess I'd ask all of you in some ways, but how fundamental is that tension? And then I guess probably the question that ultimately would go to the policymakers is, what are the chances for bridging those, laying those out in a matrix and seeing how they conflict such that somebody might be able to rationalize them better? So maybe start with you, Angela, about what you see at the campus level.
So for the federal financial aid, there's some flexibility around enrollment. So students can be enrolled as little as 1 credit hour and receive some federal programs, but then maybe 12 credit hours for several others, 6 credit hours for loans. So there's some flexibility in the federal student aid programs. But connecting those with some of the public benefits is what the challenges are. 60% of our students attend part-time for various family reasons. So, but the programs that they need require them to at least attend 12 credit hours, like cash assistance. Some of the programs around SNAP, they have to work as well. And so some of them aren't working because they're focused on school. And so there's some flexibilities in the federal student aid program, but there are some conflicts with the public benefits, but it's more about what the students' life choices are because of their family situation and how those don't mesh in the same way.
Right, but I mean, and again, this may be better for Danielle in some ways, but I mean, we certainly know, well, how much urging or encouraging do you do to try to get, and this goes to completion agenda, et cetera, but we certainly know that in general, students who are enrolled more are likelier to complete. So how much, do you just sort of let them decide based on their family circumstances? Do you urge, encourage, nudge?
So that's an interesting question for our institution. So from the financial aid perspective, I think it gets to what Mark said about cross-training. So from a financial aid perspective, we have lots of flexibility and want the students to do that. But from the academic perspective, which is our counseling and advising, which are faculty members who do that work, how much do they know about some of the public benefits and what that means to students' enrollment? And then and sometimes it's really about the academic course load that students can really maintain just based on where they are academically in preparedness and can they really do that. But our the good thing about some of the work we started is that our counseling faculty has been involved from the very beginning. So they knew about some of this work and they know what parameters students need to maintain to keep certain benefits. And so that's been helpful. But it is a tricky balance around completion and then the students' academic preparation. But they've been the ones, the counselors and the advisors have been the ones helping getting the attendance forms signed that are needed for some of the benefits and making sure that the students maintain the 12 credit hours that they need for some of the programs.
Amy Ellen, I don't know if you want to take a shot at that.
Yeah, and it varies. Yeah. For instance, with TANF cash welfare, there's a 12-month limit on what's called vocational education and training. And then after that, states have the option of do they want to allow students to continue in that, oftentimes combining with 20 hours of work. That comes from the federal government. CLAS has been very active in encouraging for a longer standalone time for students to pursue post-secondary while receiving TANF, but there hasn't been the right political environment yet to see a change like that. I see Elizabeth, one of our TANF experts, trying to bite her tongue maybe on something there, but hopefully I didn't say anything too out of line. And then with SNAP, you know, there are a set of 6 or 7 exemptions that allow you to receive SNAP if you're attending more than half time. A lot of these rules were designed to avoid the student who is rich but looks poor in college. Housing is another example of where you see policies designed in reaction to more of a negative than a positive. And so I think that the important thing is to try to get all of the right players at the table. And unfortunately, it's going to have to be players at the federal level, state level, and in some cases local levels, talking to one another like they have in Washington State. Washington is actually one of the leaders. When I did some of this research a couple years ago, talked to someone from Washington State in the Medicaid agency who talked about the way they package different programs, financial aid programs, including obscure funds such as the Carl Perkins funds that are available to a student, talked about packaging that in such a way that it wouldn't count against their eligibility for Medicaid. And so it's that, you know, it's almost like you need to have that level of thinking at the state level or at the federal level. Look, we're all here working toward the same goal, that people need to have